Hello, my name is Dr. Scott Young with our ministry channel right here, but we're going to talk a little bit more about NESARA, and we're here with Matt Moore with Cryptomore Currency. So he has a cryptomore.com,
yeah.
and I have drscottyoung.com. So we have a lot of things. Our passion, one of our passions is on money.
Yep.
And that's what we're going to talk a little bit deeper with that too. So we've talked a little bit about this weird thing called NESARA. And there's not just that there's a revaluation, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. There has to be a revaluation of the currency. The currency is flipping from the old thing to the new. And so there has to be a revaluation. Now, there's no reason for a revaluation, right?
What?
So
no reason?
There should be no reason for it if you were just part of
You're doing
it
it
wrong.
right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's what's coming up here. So we'll check you out here in just a second. Okay, so when we talk a little bit about the revaluation, then we're going to talk a little bit about fractional banking with that too. So revaluation, what in the world does that mean?
Well, in my mind, what the revaluation means is when we reset the system, there are going to have to be particular assets and particular things within the economy that the free market is going to have to readjust, reevaluate, because for the longest time, we've been under a system that has been highly manipulated, highly centrally controlled. In fact, there's a quote in my book from Foundations for Liberty that actually comes straight from the mouth of John Maynard Keynes, who is praised today for his economic ideas when it comes to fractional reserve banking and stimulating the economy. I mean, obviously, I don't subscribe to this guy's ideas. Right. However, he did admit in this quote, he said, this was out of the Consequences of the Peace in 1920. He said, if, however, a government refrains from regulation, which is simply, in simpler terms, called force and manipulation, okay, right, and allows matters to take their course, essentially commodities soon attain a level of price out of the reach of all but the rich, and the worthlessness of the money, which is fiat paper money that we use today, becomes apparent, and the fraud upon the public, inflation or money creation, can be concealed no longer.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what he's saying there is that you're going to get to a tipping point.
Yeah.
And that tipping point happens where you're going to have to flip back to a currency that has a value.
Yeah. And when you go back to a sound money system and you stop manipulating asset classes like stocks and real estate,
right,
and all of these things that's the central bank and the commercial banks have been doing for a very, very long time in order to prop up this fiat money system. When this all comes down, essentially we're going to have, hopefully, a real free market again, and the free market's going to be able to properly price in what things are actually worth.
So revaluation. Now there's two parts of revaluation. I mean, a devaluation is basically saying. Now, by the way, when you do a financial, I mean, I buy this piece of furniture and it devalues over time. Does that make sense? Because it's older, right? And then it breaks apart, and then you lose the value of the thing, right? So we think that, we see that in cars, we see that in houses.
Yeah.
Well, houses go a little other way, but another conversation. Now, when we're talking about a revaluation, that means that you're going to, if Matt has $1,000 in his savings account right now in a fiat money that is completely worthless, he's going to have $1,000 of gold-backed currency. Now, when I say that, the first thing that people say is, how would they do that? Why would they give you that money? And the answer is, if you don't, there's no point in doing a currency reset if the cabal just wanted to steal it from you.
Sure.
There wouldn't be any good reason.
Sure.
You wouldn't do it because you'd stay on this currency thing. You'd up the debt ratio because that's exactly what the Federal Reserve's been doing, right? In the 70s we were at $2 trillion of debt. In the 80s our 80s and 90s we were up at 8 trillion, and then at 16 trillion in about 2008, and now we're at 26, almost 27 trillion in debt, and they just keep up in the debt, and so Congress borrows and IRS takes, and we have all these takers, right? And we have these lobbyists with that, and you have to wash the system out. Now, if they want to steal from us, it's the same system again.
Yeah.
So you can't have that kind of system. It has to die.
Yeah.
And when it dies, Matt wins with that $1,000. That's the revaluation.
Well, and even debt jubilees are even biblical.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And
right.
so the idea is, it's not like it's new.
And actually, even over a historical point, kings would do this quite a bit.
Yeah.
Their people couldn't afford the debt, and then they would stop working, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And we're actually seeing a little bit of this.
Well, and there's actually a ratio. It's said that once a certain percentage of your annual salary or monthly salary is going towards food alone, there's unrest, there's uprisings, there's chaos, and essentially the system collapses in on itself. And so hypothetically, if the powers that be, did want to sustain power, the best thing to do is to not get to that point.
Yeah, exactly. They would find a way, and they've been doing that, by the way, all along.
Yeah,
they've been doing that. We see that even, and by the way, I'm going to share this with you a little. 9/11 was a setup point that talked about this. They pulled away money. They were about ready to release the NESARA thing on 9/11. That's going to startle you when you hear that, but that is part of that. So they didn't want to give the people back this money.
Yeah.
So when you have a revaluation, what does that do for prices? Because that's something you were talking a little bit about.
So when we have a revaluation, and the free market steps in and plays its proper role, you're going to have things like houses and things like stocks and land and all of these commodities. They should get back to a more stable and reasonable price. I mean, there's no reason why the housing market in California or New York or some of these big cities where just prices are so astronomically stupid that nobody is going to, in their right mind, spend their money and go into that. And so I think what you're going to see is when we have this correction, people are going to think, well, how am I going to, buy this or buy that? Well, I'm telling you right now, the hope is that prices will be normalized. And it's the example of when we were in the 50s and the 60s, right? Okay, when we were using a form of a sound money, okay, and we actually had silver quarters in circulation, right? And I was making $1.25 in actual silver, okay? Like, one parent could stay home and take care of the kids, and you could have a nice house and 2 cars and one parent working for, a salary under, I think it was like $30,000 or something like that. So, we've been in time periods when our money was actually worth something, and the quality
and the economy was booming with
that. Yeah, and booming, and assets were not overpriced. So I think when we do go to this revaluation stage and period, people are going to be surprised at what the real value and price of things are, because everything has just been so weighted to one side.
And I think so here's something I think that we really need to kind of explore a little bit, and we're going to talk a little future here in a minute, but we're going to do this in the next episode a little bit deeper, because we're going to talk about what 2021 feels more like. But as Matt's talking about this, I'm a business owner, okay, and I'm going to have to revalue everything that I priced. Now, it's going to happen from the cost of goods. I can't just revalue quickly. So here's my cost of goods and here's my price. I have to have the cost of goods go down, and then it's going to come down. And then you go, well, why wouldn't I want to keep this margin? Because guess what? Someone's going to jump in the market and price me down here.
Yeah.
And when that happens, I'm going to have competition. And when we have competition, more people can afford that thing.
Competition's a good thing.
It always is a good thing. And so and here's what happens. If you have cruddy business owners, they're not going to make it in a system that is built upon some good smarts.
Oh yeah, well, and that's been my biggest beef with the system that we have now.
Yep.
Is it rewards bad behavior and malinvestment,
or in stupid situations that they do. And yet what we're going to find is that revaluation is going to change. And by the way, if the Americans make, on average, there's a lot of conversation about it, but I've looked it up. If Americans make an average of $50,000 a year, the average is probably going to drop. Now, that's not going to be a bad thing, because your money, if you drop from $50,000 to $40,000, you're like, but you're going to actually afford more.
Yeah, your purchasing power is going to be greater.
So your car isn't $25,000; it's more like $12,000.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what? I can afford a better car or replace that thing more, which puts more money into the economy, which puts more money into the dealership, and then it puts more money into the housing market, and it puts more money into the real estate agent, and it puts more money into me, that I can do more and hire more people, and on and on. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's part of the cool part of the revaluation that we're going to address a little bit more. But let's move into our next area here, is the fractional banking system.
Sure.
So let's talk about what the Fed and the system has done with fractional banking and why it's so ridiculous.
Sure. Well, I mean, just on a rudimentary level, I mean, the whole system is reliant and built upon debt. There's always more debt in the system than there is currency, right?
Right.
Because the currency is created out of thin air. It's backed by nothing of real intrinsic value. It's not limited. So the government is not constrained to keep borrowing. And so when you've got a system like this, and you have fractional reserve lending practices at a regular banking level, essentially what happens is, let's say you have $100, okay, and you take that $100 to the bank. Well, a couple of years ago, the requirement was, well, on average, they need to at least keep 10% of that deposited into the account, and then they would loan out the other $90.
Hoping that Scott wouldn't come in and ask for his $100.
Yeah,
out of the account.
I mean, essentially what they would do is they would apply, and they still do this, but they would apply bank credits to your account. So when you log on and you look at your account, it still says you have $100,
yeah,
but they loaned out 90% of it, or $90 of it, and $10 of it is there. And well, that cycle continues to repeat. So like, let's say the bank loans you that $90,
right.
You take it to your bank, you deposit it in your bank, and your bank keeps $10 of it, and then they loan out $80. Okay,
right.
So
and it keeps going, and on top of, the Federal Reserve made the money, so the banks are already getting money from the money that was made, mm-hmm. on top of their getting money on the money that was loaned out,
yeah.
on a fractional system, like a 3.75 loan for $250,000 could be, I don't know, $1,400 a month or something like
sure.
that. So why is that a unreasonable kind of loan for a house kind of thing, or amount for a house? Talk to me a little bit about fractional points.
So as far as like, I guess I'm misunderstanding your question.
The interest rates. So like these interest rates that are front loaded on interest kind of thing too.
Sure. So like, why would they have lower interest rates?
Yeah. So why would we go to a lower interest rate when we have a revaluation part?
Okay, so what does the world look like when we have a revaluation?
Yeah, when we go through the revaluation, we get away from the fractional banking of all this silly stuff here. Sorry, saying something we're like, oh, what?
I'm just trying to get.
Yeah. So when we have that new system, what would it look like without that fractional banking kind of thing?
So if we're going to go back to a system where we have hard money and sound money as the foundations of the monetary system, you're going to have a type of lending that's more strenuous in the sense that it's going to be harder to borrow money, but the money that is borrowed is going to probably be highly collateralized.
Right.
And when you have a system of fractional reserve banking and they just kind of create it out of nowhere and they can keep injecting it into the system, it all sounds great and you can get the benefits of it in the beginning, but that bubble keeps growing, and all that credit, all that liquidity that's created, once that bubble pops, and all of that funny money, it's going to go racing to assets that are limited in supply. It's literally a great wealth transfer.
Right.
But in a world where you have sound money principles, it actually is good that the borrowing process is collateralized and also more strenuous to get a loan, because it makes people more careful with how they invest their money. They do more due diligence. It actually doesn't reward malinvestment and stupid things.
Right. So if Matt's the bank, he's going to go, you know what, I've got to keep Scott's loan on the books, right?
Yeah.
So first off, we would say, that $250,000 house might be, I'm making up a number, but $125,000. You go, how can you do that? Well, that actually makes it more affordable. Then that $125,000 house, even at the 3.75 rate over a 30-year period of time, isn't $1,400, but it's more like $700. Well, wait a second, I can afford that inside of my house, which means that I might even upgrade the house a little bit more and make it better of a house or whatever I might do.
Yeah.
But he's going to require, as the bank, he's going to require that Scott has the ability to pay it.
Yeah.
And part of this fractional banking system is that they actually have built into it a sucker part.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the way, historically, guys, the way that we are borrowing money today is very, very, it's not normal. Like if you look back at way back in the day, okay, interest rates were much more higher, requirements were much more strenuous. And even when we had this whole COVID stuff happen, banks are to the point now to where when you make those deposits into your account, like historically they 10%, they would keep on deposit. Well, now they don't need to keep any of it in deposit.
Yeah, it's even worse.
It's even worse. So and it's going to be, just because you have easy money and it's easy to get money doesn't mean that in the long run it's a good thing. It's actually a world of hurt.
Yeah, so Matt being the banker, and it's not good to loan to someone who can't afford it.
Yeah.
And frankly, it's not good for the person that's getting that loan. So having a revaluation of the pricing, having a more strenuous process from the banker to the bankee, let's put it that way, having ability for me to actually pay it back. And as a person who has to look at his own balance sheet all the time, we want, when I look at my AR, accounts receivable, that better be monies that I'm gonna get. Now on my personal AR with my Hearing Solution Centers company, I'm always looking at, AR is not, I don't loan people money out, but I do have insurances. Yeah. So they're covering the hearing aids and so I have AR, but that's money I'm gonna get.
Sure.
So if I have $55,000 or $75,000 outstanding, that's money that's gonna come in. And that's a good thing for that business, because even when you go through low times, it can cover you in that way. And that actually happened to me when COVID hit and everything was really tough. We had around $100,000 of AR and it dipped. God was so faithful. We went down from $100,000 to about $12,000 because he just brought in cash and it covered me in those rough time frames with that too. And yet that's exactly good for the loaner or the bank with that.
Yeah.
And so that's part, so the revaluation is going to increase what your money is worth.
Yep.
And it's going to increase the strenuous nature of loaning, so that you're not going into this massive over debt point.
Yeah, you're not rewarding bad behavior.
Right. And so, and bankruptcy they actually say your debt to income ratio should be, if you're up at 30 to 50%, you're screwed. You should be going to bankruptcy. So, and that's not a good thing. And so the system today, the reason why it's unsustainable is the system today is at 150% debt to income.
I mean, mathematically, the system's going to fail. It's just a matter of time.
And so it's better to not have, the Greek system where they just failed and just said, well, we just throw up our hands.
Sure.
What Trump has done is realized, wait a second, we need to manipulate and use everything from that bankruptcy part of the Federal Reserve.
Yep.
And then we'll have the revaluation system that happens inside of the system. Then we have that, and then people aren't destitute.
Yeah. I mean, constitutionally, we need to go back to a gold and silver standard because hypothetically, in the Constitution, it says no state government can accept a payment of debt in other than gold and silver. So the simple fact that we're paying our debts, which is a tax, a levy tax to us, is a debt to the state. And we're paying it in these fiat dollars that aren't backed by gold and silver.
Well, that's the 14th Amendment. That's the 14th Amendment with Section 4 that NESARA is actually coming out of, guys. That's exactly where it says. It says, when banks are loaning something to someone that they don't know all the information, they're not liable for that.
Sure.
And so there's so much, crazy thing that's happened with that. So I think that's the cool part of this, guys. It's a good system with that too, that we're moving into.
Yeah.
So that's some of the stuff that we're talking about back and forth. We're going to talk a little bit more about what the future is like here in just a minute and what that might mean for people as we go along. So check us out. Go to Matt Moore, cryptomore.com. Yeah. And drscottyoung.com. You can see the books that are coming out. He's got his books on Foundation of Liberty. My new book is on NESARA and the Mark of the Beast. And trust me, I've got about 3 or 4 books that are always in disrepair coming out. So we're working through that kind of stuff as we go along. So check our YouTube sites out too. Thank you so much.